fortunate and blessed to have a number of buildings in St. Joseph that dates back in the golden years of very, very nice monumental buildings, that be mansions, churches, and commercial buildings downtown. So we've had our archives has a number of these particular original drawings, all on linen, hand-drawn, of course, with ink on linen paper. Before you, thank you, Kelsey. This is a particular view of the Missouri Theater back when you'll note that the folded plate awnings that are out in front was added when it was felt in the downtown area that the pedestrians needed some cover as they're coming to the downtown and they're doing their shopping from one storefront to the other storefront. We're starting to move into the era of finding ourselves having interior malls starting to develop, and which drastically changed the downtown utilization at that time. The next slides that let me speak a little bit about the exterior, because this is the way I recall the building back at the time when it was really utilized as a theater. And so the city had not acquired the building at that time. This building was owned by movie house company, and they themselves took care of the building, and then they started to not take care of the building and become, in the late 60s to early 70s, almost a building that was going to be demolished. From that point, it moved into the period of the city taking it over. As you look at the building, a little bit of history, just so you'll know, I feel that it's important when you're doing renovation and restoration and repairs that you have a little bit of background about, well, how did this particular building end up being what it is? This particular structure goes back to the period of 1926 to 27. The architects on the building were two brothers, the Boulder brothers, which was Carl and Robert. The building was opened in June the 25th at 1927. And the building construction cost at that time was $1 million. The building at that time had the capacity of 1,217 patrons. And at that opening evening session, the admission cost was 25 cents. One of the outstanding pieces in this was the Wurlitzer organ. And bear in mind, basically, this theater, as many of these at that era of time, opened as a vaudeville theater. And so the design of the theater on the exterior and the interior was to take people in the 20s into entering an area that is changing the feeling of what they have been dealing with in their day-to-day life. The work that they're doing, so they would be walking into a space that was completely more elaborate, a whole different setting than what they're accustomed to be, very relaxing type situation. Other points about it was that a young man in his 20s, Gregory, his name, did all of the plaster castings of the interior and exterior. And by 1979, this particular structure was added to the National Register of Historic Places. Style being kind of a mixture of Art Deco, Moorish, the different areas within the building, exotic revival. So again, on the interior is quite ornate, but it's a mixture of different designs being used in combining this in an eclectic way. The building at that time also had dressing rooms, the fly loft, the organ pit, and a single balcony. At this time, the organ has been removed. And so changes came about within the building then. And also one of the things to point out that both Carl and Robert had, they did not have any formal education. They practiced in the Midwest. They designed many, many theaters. Carl himself became an AIA member in 1917. His brother joined him in 1919, and it ended up that the younger of the two, Robert, was the actual designer of the Missouri Theater that you have in this particular clip. So Stephanie, let's go to the next slide. I would like for you all to see as we take a little bit of a walkthrough of what it is today. As a matter of fact, this weekend I've been to 3 different evening performances at the theater, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. This is exactly pretty much as you would see it as you would walk in. So when the first go around in the renovation work, I earlier stated this was being used by a industry that was in the, it was not obviously AMC, that group didn't exist, but someone comparable to that had this as a motion picture theater. They had taken it over. It was no longer a vaudeville. Obviously the organ was removed. So the concession stand was really right where you see the green cloth covered table. And none of the curtains was on the back that you see. Actually, when we did the renovation, that was covered up totally with hardboard, and found that behind that was glass. You can see the staircase. There's a staircase on the left and the right, taking you up to the mezzanine area. So let's, Stephanie, if you would, pardon me, Kelsey, if we would, can we go to the next slide, please? Again, this is today. You would see that the lobby coming into the doors. This is the area of the tile. This is all existing. Although the 2 grills that's there on the mechanical system that you see that are gray, one is existing, one we had fabricated and was made by laser. Basically, all of the detail of the ceiling that you're seeing was completely covered up, did not exist. So let's go to the next slide, please. Mezzanine area, this is where the only restrooms that are public restroom, male and female. All of this then was completely redone, carpeting throughout. This goes back to the early first work that was done and completed for the value of $1.3 million for the interior. And this goes back to our request for proposal was dated back in 1999 of August, was the first renovation. Before that time, there was a transformation from it being the motion picture theater to performing arts. That happened because the city bought the building. They did not want the building to be demolished, which was nearly going to happen. So with that being the case, the city took it over and did the first interior remodeling only, and also the folded plate canopies was removed. Kelsey, let's go to the next slide. Today, this is the interior of the building. LED lighting was added back in the design work that we talked about. All the cove lighting you see that's illuminating the columns as you look at the area of the balcony, these was individual sockets with either an amber, green, or red clear bulb that was in place. This was all existing. The lights above and the cove above in the cornice area is at the columns as well. The organ screen that's in red as well. These were all replaced with kinetic program, computer operated LED program lighting for those as well. Again, this would go back to the completion of 2001. Kelsey, we'll do next. These are 2 different shots just to give you an idea of the feel of the balcony, and the seating again is in the area of just a little over 1,000. Seating in the back was changed for ADA compliance, and a ADA compliant restroom was also constructed on the main concourse area, at the lobby area. As I indicated, the Boiler Brothers like to create a space interior that would transform your thinking of coming from your home and the hard laboring that you're doing and come into this space that may be a palace feel. This particular case here, they brought you in and provided then what appeared to be a canvas tent awning overhead as the main chandelier. Next one, Kelsey. A little closer shot of the appearance of the chandelier, all of which was renovated. Every bit of this that you're seeing is made out of plaster. The rope that configures the configuration of the rope and the appearance of what is the canvas is totally plaster. And a tremendous amount of cabling is hanging above to support this. Go to the next one, Kelsey. So let's step back at the beginning of that. When the work was to start to do any of the renovation, we in 1999 and 2000 came in, and this was the conditions that we found that was the first, quote, renovation that was done. One of the things that we knew that this was not the color scheme of the original. Those colors were not used then. The other thing that we knew was we had a tremendous amount of moisture problems. So the slide on the left, you can see where the water is starting to deteriorate, the relief that is all plaster as well. In this first work that was done, and that was the work completed that you see the colors and all that was done, it was not an effort to totally restore the building back to more of its original character. City was just wanting to get the building back to being used by the symphony, the performing arts, the Rubidium resident theater. Bear in mind, too, this building was not designed for those kind of functions. The stage in width and the depth of the stage makes it difficult for some of the theatrical groups to be able to use the building to have an efficiency. But anyway, they've succeeded. They do extremely well with it. But when the city took it over, they were going to make it a performing arts center. Notice the little rosettes that's around in the ceiling and the dental work that's there as well. In our firm, the first go around back, at that time we cast both the different sizes of those rosettes with plaster in the office and then presented those to the general contractor for them to install as the renovation was being done. We found that when the first renovation was done to restore much of the plaster relief that was deteriorated, at that time we still had some of the older plaster contractors in business, and they were just elated to get the opportunity to rebuild back that type of workmanship. Next, Kelsey. Well, this is the work starting. When we went in, the curtains were not there. There were flipper doors entering into the theater, which was very common back for most theaters at that time. The kind of a cafe type flipping doors as you would enter in. Mentioned the glass. This glass was actually there, but it was sandwiched with the closure that was done across all of that area. And so this was in the process now of being demolished. As you can see, the seating was covered, and also the seating was all restored. Again, scaffolding, as you start there, you can kind of pick up in that view. Scaffolding was built all the way up to the the canvas ceiling. In this particular renovation phase, the city allowed me to have a contingency. We used $50,000. I doubt that I could get that particular contingency in today's situation. It's difficult to have that happen with owners, especially municipalities. But in this case, we were able to get the city to agree to allow us to have $50,000 in the contingency. The contractor had to include that in his bid, and that was included in what was the cost for that package of the renovation. To do the interior painting and to do the plaster work back in 2001, contractor's price was $460,000, and that also had a contingency of $30,000 on that. One of the things that it was very important in this type of renovation work was to be able to have the opportunity to look at the progress, to evaluate whether you're going to tear it apart and rebuild it or whether you're going to restore it and be able to use it the best you can. In some cases, we were able to restore it, repair it, and it was that method. In other cases, you had to totally remove it and rebuild it. In the cases of others, like the grills that was metal, you had missing grill, and so you were to rebuild something to be as close as possible to that. So the scaffolding enabled me to climb to the top, walk around on a plywood and touch different pieces of the canvas and that plaster, that rope, and do the repair work. Decide at the spot whether we needed to repair it for $2,500 or whatever. Next slide, Kelsey, please. A little closer now to the details. These are the colors that we worked with. We commissioned a consultant, and I highly advise doing so in the case of something of this ornate work. Evergreen was brought in from New York. They are a preservation group that works with a lot of theaters. We brought them in to work with the color selections for paint. There was 27 different color selections made. That was based on paint scrapings that was taken of the existing and then analyzed. They came back and we had detailed drawings, say, of like what you're seeing in these views. Every color, we would have that noted on the drawings as to what that color is for the painter to have a schedule as to what their scope of work would be. As I commented, I said again back in 2001, this was nearly $500,000 project just in painting and repair of plaster work. Majority of that probably is the painting cost more than it was the plaster work. The rosettes that you're looking at, some of those were originally now dating back to 1926. Some of those would date back to 2001. Kelsey, could I have the next slide, please? Well, that puts us at a point of now the idea of what we're dealing with for exterior situation. I was contacted back in 2017 and 2018 to take a look at the outside. In doing that, I asked to have the opportunity for the fire department and some other lifts to be able to review the details of the exterior of the building. The building on the outside had not had proper repair work. And so at that point, what was happening was that there was a lot of cracking and a lot of moisture. And as I indicated earlier, you did see the deterioration of the plaster back in the earlier years, and honestly, that had not been addressed very well, and so there was still deterioration coming on the building. So that began the process and a contract to work with that. Contract ended up being for construction was $612,000 worth of tuck pointing, stone repair, replacement, and structural repair to the building, and to rebuild the building back. To do that, that required building the scaffolding that you see in the right-hand picture. The scaffolding then enabled us to go back in layer by layer and take a look at the overall condition of the building before we turned the contractor loose. We bid the contract first as a tuck pointing project, and after further investigating and by means of the scaffolding, started to look at it with a structural issue. Next slide, please, Kelsey. What I mean by that is if you take a look at some of these towers, you'll start to see that the stone is starting to shift outward. The cracks were becoming so large that the moisture was entering in to the glazed stone, and the city was not aware of this until we actually was up walking it. These are some shots that we took earlier to take a look at some of those details. So this prompted a major review on the structure of the building. Next one, Kelsey. Thank you. This particular shot shows of the mosaic tile. This is not the original 1920 627 panel that was in the facade of the building. Originally, this was stained glass areas. Behind the stained glass was lamp holders that were sockets that were available around the arch of the profile, and also small openings to enter that area from the attic space to change out the light bulbs. On the right-hand side, you can see the droppings of the tile that it had cracked and was falling off onto the surface below. And so again, there was major issues as to why this is starting to deteriorate like this. Next, please. For the detail review, we're now into December, we're into the winter. This particular covering stayed this way from next year. And so basically, everything was behind the tarps and it out, but it allowed us to continue the extensive investigative work and deciding what to repair and what to replace. So that was very beneficial. We didn't, took nearly 8 months to get it completed. Next slide. All right, so if you were on the scaffolding, if you was now looking at a panel, we were starting to demolish areas to see what we had structurally that we're dealing with. The surprise that we found is we took some of the stone away. This is the makeup how the building was built. Not my normal findings of how masonry walls might be in a current modern building, but it's quite common in a building of this age. A mixture of different tile, structural tile, masonry. The slide to the right is the one is concerning to us when we started to see that the vertical column and the enormous amount of rusting that was starting to take place and the deterioration and lamination of the column. There are 4 major columns, 2 at each, 1 at each end and 2 at midpoint. Next slide. So in review of what we could come up with, an old set of structural fabrication drawings, we knew that there was a splice plate, and this is what's on the right-hand side of the columns. And so as we started to get more into the columns, we started to find that this rusting effect and the delamination of the columns was continually coming down. So we were concerned about the splice plate, and so we demolished the wall all the way down until we could encounter this particular point to see what the column connection was going to be like. At that point, we were pleased to see that this is a condition. It was by far acceptable. It was sound, and that vertically upward, the column was where the issues was not at the splash plate. So we now knew exactly what kind of correction that we had to do. Next one. So knowing what we had to do with the columns, we ended up, each column was exposed and was properly prepared with a rust prohibitor. And I noticed that, I'm going to pause for a moment. Kelsey, I think somebody indicated there may be an audio problem.
Sorry, I am not having that problem. I can hear you. There have been a couple moments in your talk when the audio got a little spotty, but right now I can hear you all right. Is anyone else having that issue? You can put it in the chat.
Okay. Shall I go ahead, Kelsey?
Yeah, go ahead.
Through this process, our structural engineer, we would either meet on the scaffolding or we were in the lift bucket to look at details to decide what was going to be the proper action to take. Like I said, we were prepared to literally take out all 4 columns, replace with new columns, and then rebuild back, but that was not the corrective action that needed to be taken. So then we were ready to work on the center area where the mosaic tile is now located. Again, we did some exploratory cutting, some opening to see just what was there. We had no idea. You see at the photograph to the right, this was a picture that showed the sockets, the lamp holders, one of the openings in which they would raise the panel and be able to reach out to change the lamps, and then the curvature of the arch. Now, the framing that you're seeing was not original. This framing was added at one point, I'm not sure when, but it was the framing to close off this area as what we had seen in the original first photo that I had that had the folded plate canopies on front. It was just a basic white solid panel, but no decoration whatsoever. At one point, there was the tile that was added. And so the problem of it is the tile area was flexing, structurally was not capable. So we looked at what could be done to stabilize this, to work with this area. We then consulted again with the city, with the historic preservationist at the city at that time, and said, okay, the options are to replace this with a sound system that's better to carry the tile, or we step back and try and do a system that would be of the what we have heard being a glass feature that was there, stained glass. And we were instructed that no one was really sure about the stained glass detail, what it was like, how to work with that. But everybody was familiar with what was the area that was a tile area. So to go back and restore it with the tile. The drawing in the middle is the sketch that was made that I prepared as to how the framing was built, what was the original, and then what we were going to do to enhance the stabilization of a new substrate and new tile. And Kelsey, let's go to the next slide. Slide on the right, of course, indicates the new substrate hardboard installed. The one on the left with the tile setter working with the mosaic tile and setting the tile back. A tile that in grout that was similar to what, in appearance, as close as we could come up with colors to match, that was there at the time of what was restored. Again, this system now does not flex and is more stable to work with the tile that's in that mosaic pattern. So there was a lot of moisture problem that was occurring around that area due to the failure of the old system. Next slide. Well, to give you an idea of what this process would take on, as we're starting to remove the glazed terracotta material, these were numbered and put on pallets to put them back. Picture to the right is a picture that is showing the existing column now with the coating that was applied, of course, sanding it off, completely cleaning it, checking the thickness of the steel as well, and then sanding it as well, and then coating the product with a rust prohibitor. You can see the original wall to the back of that. Now we have vertical dowels. We have now concrete block as we're starting to rebuild back up, and then we start bringing the glazed stone back in place. We were working with a company that was in the Kansas City area. We're able to find a source that could fabricate pieces. We were fortunate that by careful removal, we did not have that many pieces that had to be replaced in fabrication, but we was able to do that then. So, next slide. Well, in September then of 2018, the theater opened back up. Again, as I indicated, the Rubidium Resident Theater was one of the performing arts group that uses the theater. And so now the theater is the exterior of this is the south facade that you're looking at. You'll also note in the picture as well that the doorways are recessed back in the foyer area. This is the existing location of where the doors were originally. And in the opening of this presentation, the doors had been moved forward, and the storefront aluminum was along the linear face of the building. And so now the entry area is recessed. It's back to the original location, and the decorative mosaic tile on the floor that you walk into, as well as the decorative light fixtures and ceiling of the extension of the canopy, brings you in to the lobby of the theater. The theater has gone through a number of other renovations that the city has provided. I believe at this point, total expenditure that I'm aware of in the last 20-some years of being involved in this particular facility for the city of St. Joseph. Back in 2013, the house fly system was replaced. That's a 60-some plus feet of loft space. The original was removed, the fly system was removed, and the new was installed for $213,000. At the proscenium, the flooring was extended out with a portable stage that comes out over the area of the orchestra pit, and new flooring then on the stage itself. That was at a cost of $90,000. Dressing rooms have all been restored. Air conditioning was provided in each area at separate controls for each, for heating and cooling in 2018 for $170,000. New sound system has been provided for $300,000. Stage lighting is being done as we speak. New LED lighting is being installed for $95,000. And in construction right now are public restrooms. Main floor only had the ADA restroom that was provided back in 2002, or beg your pardon, in 2001. And today there is, in an adjoining space to the theater, and a doorway will give you access to that, will be public restrooms with multiple male and female fixtures, which is greatly needed because the other main public restrooms, as I mentioned earlier, was on the mezzanine. Also concessions, which is very minor, is there on the mezzanine as well. And also the house manager, as well as the city, is not wanting people to have, obviously, popcorn, things of that type in the theater. So that's sort of the history of 25 years of the work on a particular structure that I wanted to point out that there are times in the work that I have found that, the question is this going to be a preservation, or are we going to restore it, or are we going to have to demolish it and refabricate something to replace it? And I think it's critical to, in working with a client, that a client is able to work along that line. And what I mean by that, and most of my work is in the public sector, not private. And so I'm working with money that is coming either from a bond issue or tax levy or whatever. And that comes with different controls than it is to work with a private individual doing restoration and restoring their home, something of that type. So again, this had some cases where we had to demolish it and then rebuild back to come as close as we could to what it was fitting. I go back to the stained glass. Would like to have had the okay to do stained glass. Again, not sure what that would have been like because we have no record, no documents to indicate what that might be for that. Kelsey, can we go to the next slide? I wanted to show you the last project here with the idea. This is the Carnegie Library here in the community. The reason I present this is a case where demolition is not necessary. This was the stone treatment that was deteriorating on this particular facade of this building. We did the interior and exterior renovation of this. We worked with the state on this project. This is the library facility for the St. Joseph facility. And then working with the state preservation as we was reviewing different products. The old slate roof had failed drastically, and we was able to have products approved by them that was acceptable, that does look like a slate roof, but it's not a true slate. And so the expenditure was not quite as great. The repair work was done on the stone and not replacing the stone. The product that we have found very successful in that is a product named Yon. And this is a product with qualified, skilled, trained installers is able to build back the stone. And certainly the character of that has been very acceptable and very well received. And it's a high-performing product to do that. There's other products out there as well to do that as well. So we're not having to cut out and replace with new stone, which in itself has its own problems, is trying to match the old stone with a quarry, and where do you get stone that's going to match it in today's situation? Kelsey, I believe that's the last slide. So in closing, in summary, I would say to you that hopefully you work with individuals if you're doing a restoration work or preservation, that funding is available to give you a contingency to work with. There always is going to be some unknowns. Certainly on the outside, beginning to be a tuck pointing at the Missouri Theater, I was never expecting to be tearing off the exterior of the building and trying to find 4 vertical columns as a needle in a haystack. And this was a case where they realized that there wasn't any other option. It had to take that path of the drastic measures. So, Kelsey, I would entertain any questions.